Hello, hello, hello. I'm David Yee. I'm an American Falcon. I'm a VP of engineering and an American Falcon. My pronouns are he, him, so if you're talking about me outside, that's how you can refer to me. I am really, unspeakably honored to be able to stand here in front of you today at the start of a conference that I really love. To talk about thresholds, a changing industry, the middle spaces, and the touchstones that carry you through them. But it's early in the day, and so I want to play a little game. I hope you can bear with me here. You're going to have to remember this throughout my talk, so pay close attention. Let's all pretend that we're sharing a little secret. When I raise up my hands like this, we all say, shh. Okay, let's practice. Oh, the barbican. Let's do it again. Oh, it's like a crisp can of tonic, right? All right, now, between my hands, okay? Okay, better than I expected. Better than I expected. All right, now try this. Okay. This makes sense. Done. Well done. Oh. All right. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about the year 2009, thereabouts. Something changed fairly dramatically about our work in engineering management on or around that point. I have a thesis. In that time, because of emergent conditions in the marketplace, the economy, new products and operating models, what we understood engineering management to be, sort of the depth of that work and the tactics we were using, shifted decisively. Now, I'm going to be the first person to acknowledge I had no idea what was going on at the time, where it would take us, and I would say that nobody really did. In hindsight, though, it's easy to tell a story about 2009. Software engineering had changed. Stack Overflow had recently been founded, so this is the commodification of how do I do this? GitHub, also a year in, the commodification of where do I build this? We saw a sharp pivot in operations with both AWS and Heroku, the commodification of where do I put this? And we saw exponential growth in Twitter, the commodification of who do I complain to about this, right? At the same time, our habits were changing. We saw broad popularization of agile and lean methodologies and an orientation to product management. Now, engineers were able to work faster and more autonomously, and you could put more engineers on any given code base, which, as the economy shifts in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, a pivot point for the global economy and for this industry, and interest rates plummet, it leads to more funded startups with more engineers working on more code bases. So, the market became more competitive, even as the big firms grew larger, and in many cases struggled to capture or retain talent from their competitors, leading salaries and retention strategies to go through the roof, even at smaller, scrappier companies. Engineering managers suddenly had to focus on hiring, created more fluid and communicative team cultures, and building a sense of continuity in people's careers, ideally in our own orgs. Our work as engineering managers was suddenly and visibly central to the success of billion-dollar companies. And the really funny thing about this is that not that much earlier, engineering managers almost went extinct. Google famously abolished engineering managers in 2002, finally capitulating to the argument that we didn't offer all that much, flattening the org into a peaceful and harmonious ecosystem of predictably high-functioning and collaborative software engineers. This utopian era of self-organization at Google lasted, by all accounts, for a few months. Why? Because an organization of sufficient dynamism, complexity, and pace requires signaling and line of sight. And that is not a side gig. Systems need engineers, engineering managers engineer people, systems. So it's not a surprise that in 2009, Google tried something else. They published Project Oxygen, which laid out at the time 8 qualities of a great engineering manager. And, you know, to us now, much of this feels like the kind of thing we talk about every day, every year, in conferences just like this one. If you can read this, all of this feels super familiar to us. But I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. What we consider table stakes today was not at all obvious in 2009. I can tell you this for sure. If they could have gamified effective software engineering teams, they would have. We are here because we need to be. We needed a shift from thinking full-time about software to being in the business of human behavior as it relates to software. And that is where a new craft emerges, whether or not we notice it. Now, that noticing, it takes time. And it leads to systems that amplify and sustain best practices. Among those systems are this very conference, which takes place for the first time in 2015. Conversations about the craft of engineering management take off on Twitter, in blogs, and in books, like Lara Hogan's Resilient Management, which discuss some of the behavioral and psychological aspects of this work, and Camille Fournier's The Manager's Path in 2017, which laid out a well-structured evaluation of the craft and observed several trends in the practices that were evolving to meet our emergent needs. Among them, and I cannot overstate the importance of this, career ladders with both IC and manager tracks. Simple, right? For years, our industry had set the expectation that your manager was simply the most senior engineer in the room. Everything that I'm talking about in this shift starts from this position. Before this shift, the only way to grow your compensation was to become a manager. And like most compensation levers, we actually didn't pay a lot of attention to the damaging human side effects of pulling it. Human beings are dramatically different from software and significantly less deterministic, I'm sorry to say. So we're now building very different kinds of leaders evaluated by a different standard, and that standard has led to a codification of best practices. Team operating models, structured holistic one-on-ones, ways of evaluating effective teams, consistent hiring practices, career ladders, collaborative and distributed work practices, and a growing focus on bias and psychological safety in our work. So the craft of engineering management today is very different because the industry is very different. The circumstances changed. We changed. All right, let's go again. 3 years ago, 2020, the whole world, in what again seems like an instant, changed. As COVID-19 spread through the world, we all experienced, in different ways, but all together, an unspeakable tragedy in which our lives changed decisively and dramatically. And whether or not we were touched by this tragedy directly, as so many of us were, we all went home. The fortunes of many companies vanished. Those of a few others whose products met a world in solitude thrived. That shift rocked our industry, and then we can look back on an era that we very quickly named the Great Resignation. A combination of existential dread, a need for control, and the opportunity to jump ship and take that control led to profound changes in our work as companies and managers. C-level executives, not really known for their comfort with distributed work, promised employees they could work from anywhere forever. right? How many of you had CEOs who promised that you could work anywhere forever? Yeah, there's some of you. Are you working anywhere forever? Oh, all right. Come talk to me after. They extended generous benefits for remote work and mental health, some of which employees had been asking for years. In short, all of the things that our craft had been optimized for, psychological safety, stability, retention, core needs, were ratcheted up as far as it could go, and we still couldn't do anything about it. Again, this is the very definition of a radical event, a disruption, an inflection point, a threshold. And then, seemingly just as quickly as the tide came in, it rushed out. Companies once flush with lockdown revenue watched as it vanished. CEOs apologized en masse for hiring too optimistically, in some cases having done so over the course of several years. A market that was just a year ago hyper-optimized for employee retention has shifted. Industry execs are cracking down. Thousands of engineers are being called back to the office, sorry. Many having relocated during the pandemic in what the wake of some, not me for the record, called a failed experiment in remote work. Global pandemic, experiment, I digress. Now we see in this transition, which again takes place over the course of 3 years, a perceived shift from employee retention and support to operational efficiency and direction. And in many ways, this is not new. This is the nature of our job. We hold in tension the needs of our companies and the people who work in those companies, the people who make up those companies. Because the ingredients have never really changed. It's always some variation of people, problems, and time, right? You need to put this person on this problem, or you need this problem done in this amount of time, or you need this person for this amount of time to be working on this problem. You bring those things together in the context of your company's goals and their bank accounts. But the pieces are in varying states of tension with each other. Your job actually does not change. So if you can keep those 3 things in equilibrium, you're probably keeping these things in equilibrium until you can't. In moments like these, the balances are all wacky. When that tension is healthy, we don't really notice it. It's equilibrium. We have signals and systems that help everybody operate in sync and in service of that balance, that tension. What makes engineers effective in their work? What keeps them engaged in their work? We're engineering managers because we understand, or should understand, what engineers need in order to be effective and engaged and satisfied with their work. Pointed totally over the wrong shoulders for that. It's our job to both navigate that tension and to adjust the tension to meet a moment in which everything pulls harder in which something pulls harder at one end of the cord. The Great Resignation was actually one of those moments when the balance is disrupted, sharply and understandably, honestly, in many ways to the needs of human beings. At the center of these companies, everything shifts. Everybody's on edge because they notice that shift. But it's hard to talk about. It's hard to ask about. What happened? What's happening? Those 5 minutes I spent talking about 2009, that didn't happen overnight. It took conservatively 7 years, 6 years, 7 years. The eruption of new products and technologies, they didn't just clunk into place. It's not like GitHub and Stack Overflow and Twitter. They all just decided to make a new industry. And even if I focus on the churning tides of resignation we went through 2 years ago, that took months to gain steam. If I switch and zoom in and look at the emergence of COVID-19 even, we're talking about months of transmission, migration, and global recognition. We talk about thresholds as having a before and an after, but there's always an in-between. Whatever journey we're on collectively today, we haven't arrived. We're in between. What does it feel like to live in the spaces in between? What does it feel like to live in a liminal space? Now, I want to unpack this. Let's talk a little bit about liminality. Liminality is a concept that plays a key part in the rites of passage that make up so much of our remembered lives, whether it's coming-of-age rituals like quinceañeras or bar mitzvahs, partnership rituals like marriage, educational rituals like graduations. In any rite of passage, A liminal space stands between the moment we cease to be in one state, one world, and when we take up our new world, our new status. Now, many of these events are worth celebrating, so we remember these rites most often in moments that bring us joy, but lots of passages are not joyous, and so our cultures have developed funereal rites and other rites of separation. These rites are all unique to these moments, and they give us the scaffolding we require to release our old lives, reflect, and start anew. We're wired to think that changes are sudden, jarring, instant, to look out for novelty. And so we forget about the middle bits, the paths between spaces, the liminal moments, and maybe for good reason. These spaces, dark hallways, forest paths, children's birthday parties can be scary and dangerous. If you've been at a 4-year-old's birthday party, they're scary and dangerous. But these liminal spaces and liminal moments are important spaces in and of themselves because they are the change you are undergoing. And to properly dwell in that moment, you need to first recognize there are no stable rules to govern a moment of change. And second, to note that you are, consciously or subconsciously, laying the foundation in this liminal space for whatever world we are entering. For example, career ladders. We see in their depth and sophistication a reflection of our industry's dramatic growth. We see in their structure a call to resist bias. We see in the behaviors and skills we document in those career ladders a sense of progress that hopefully gives people a reason to stay and grow with us. That wasn't the new stable state arriving. I was talking about the manager's path earlier and about Camille Fournier. Camille herself would say she was observing this, and others were observing this as they reacted to a transition that really called for it. The decisions we make here reflect what we think we are becoming, and they have a profound impact on what the end result is, a new life, a new industry. I have good news and bad news. The good news, you want the good news first? Okay, good. All right, the good news is you get to try this whole liminal space thing on for size. The bad news is it's because we're not done. I can go back to 2009 and try to pin the shift in engineering management on any one moment. GitHub, the financial collapse in 2008, the roiling hellscape that is Twitter. But there was no one moment. It just felt strange to be working in that moment because there was so much that was unexpected, but history moves a lot more slowly than our attention spans do. And so I didn't exactly go out and print "Engineering managers are the future" t-shirts. What I can tell you is that it's happening again. I know that's not exactly useful without a bit more context, and I'm not going to pretend to tell you with unfailing accuracy where we are going, though I expect each of you 10 years from now to come up to me and say, hey, you should have known, so that we can all have a good chuckle. What I do know is that I feel that inexorable shift in tension on the cord that holds people and companies together, and I think you do too. The cord is being pulled throughout the industry from the business side, the macroeconomic side. And we are adapting quickly to that shift. So what am I telling you to do? Stop. And notice. You are living in a liminal space. In this industry, at your companies, in this world, and at this conference. In some way, you are in between. What will you do? You should think about it, because nobody is going to tell you what to do. Now, you'll have a bunch of people on stage today who are going to be talking about what they've observed, what they think the right thing is to do, but they are not telling you what to do. Nobody is going to tell you what to do. On a local level, your manager is probably telling you what to do, but your manager doesn't know any better than you do, and certainly not any better than I do, what lies on the other side of this liminal space. They know the local market conditions. They know the goals of the company. But I guarantee you they are reacting to somebody, the CTO, reacting to somebody, the CEO, reacting to somebody else, the board, reacting to something they heard from their friends at drinks on Saturday. You know it's true. Your CEO doesn't know. The venture capitalists do not know. Mark Zuckerberg, I regret to inform you, does not know where we are going. Not the authors, not the books, not me. We didn't invent 2009, but we all observed it. Who here was a manager in 2009? Who here was working in the industry in 2009? Raise your hand. Right? So it's not everybody in the room. Right? A lot of you have not seen anything like this before, and what we're seeing before is not anything like what happened before. Nobody knows what to do because the inputs of this moment are so varied. So in preparing this talk, I talked to a couple dozen people who I really trust. And to the last one, when I asked them sort of, what do you think is happening? Where are we going? And to the last, they all said, this is clearly an inflection point. It feels historic. But that's not clear what lies on the other side of this divide, or how permanent this transition felt to them. And again, I regret to inform you, there is no single omniscient engineering manager oracle. There is no master of ceremonies. Mary will do for now, but like in general, there are no master of ceremonies of engineering management. The industry is not external to you. I'll tell you a secret. You are the industry. The industry is you. The one thing I'm absolutely certain about is that what you all collectively decide to do with the information you have today, the information that you're learning today, what the companies who make up this industry decide to do, that's what's going to happen to this industry. That is what's going to happen to this craft. The hush that washes over the crowd is made up of your individual voices. And therefore, it's the decisions that all of you make in this liminal space that we shape what we hold to be true 6 years from now. This moment of reflection and thought is critical. Everything hinges on it. Not just in what we adopt, but the stable systems and practices we're called for now in this uncertain moment to question. What are you being called to let go of? Not because it doesn't help us today, right now, but because there's a lot of things that are going to break if some of the core assumptions of our industry change. You're going to be responsible for the outcomes that your processes that you're familiar with may not reliably bring about. Whether business outcomes, retention outcomes, the safety of your workplace, or the satisfaction of your teams. What do we want to hold on to in order to achieve those outcomes? How do we not throw out the proverbial babies with the bathwater? How do we question whether the processes we value have actually made a difference in our work, at our companies, for our people? And what better time to look closely at them than when they begin to break down? And then if those processes don't serve us, what do you lean on? What really never changes, even as your assumptions collapse? When you don't have a process you can trust, you have a principle that you can. These can be your organization's principles, they can be your own, but these belong to you because I'd argue you adopt your organization's principles, right, when you choose to. Now, I'd like everybody here to spend a moment on the principle, value, incantation that guides you most. I'll tell you mine in a bit, but I want you to spend 10 seconds reflecting on your own. So in silence, just think of this. What is the principle, value, or incantation that guides you most in your work? Okay, having done that, hold it in mind. I'm going to ask you throughout the day to ask the people around you what their principles are. Ask them what guides them when nothing they can reach for will spit out the right answer. Okay, I'll tell you mine. It's the first thing my very first boss at a computer repair shop in New York called TechServe hammered into my head as a young person in a room full of broken toys. Do the right thing. This is the #1 rule of TechServe, and for a 21-year-old, it's profoundly nonspecific and terrifyingly vague. When you're repairing a computer and holding somebody's epic novel, film project, or other such life's work in your hands, I recovered the Beastie Boys hard drive once. It was really exciting. But what's unsaid here is the necessary and critical balance I was talking about earlier. What does the business need? What does the customer need? What outcome serves both best? There are so many variables that you have to take into account in a moment where you just need to do the right thing. A moment when no rule has been written to tell you what to do. By definition, you turn to this value when all else fails. Moments too unique to put into the run book. It's this principle that I turn to again and again. It's the incantation of the liminal space. And I have spent several years trying to hone two instincts here. What is the right thing? How do you do it? So sometime later, I came up with a way of approaching that ambiguity and novelty. And these are 4 skills, which you can steal if you'd like, that I would magic up into any engineer, colleague, leader. It is these 4 skills that I actually try to teach every day to my 6-year-old kid. Notice, think, persuade, proceed. I think of these as the 4 stages of caring about something, of bringing something new into existence. I find it particularly useful to turn to in liminal spaces like the one we're in today, because it's not always so clear what I'm called to do. I notice a shift, I think about it, I persuade, sometimes myself, sometimes others, about the right action, and I proceed alone or in concert to the outcome. I do this for everything I care about, large and small. Now, this maps pretty nicely to my incantation of do the right thing, yeah? Notice and think tell us what the right thing is for problems both simple and complex. You're always going to need strong skills in judgment and discernment. Persuade and proceed tell us how to do it. In large organizations and startups both, you're going to need to be able to lead and act. This cycle of thought and action are central to charting a path across every threshold. You cannot do wrong in this moment by caring. Draw on that principle you've got in your mind and ask yourself how you can bring it to bear against the many uncertainties you face, and choose something you care about. You can't figure it all out, but you can pick something important that you're going to get obsessed with, and you can know that you're not alone because, as we were talking about the manager of Voltron, there's a bunch of people around you who care about different things. I have been lucky to work in this industry for a long time. And I've seen how it's changed and the role that leaders play in this space, how we think. As scary as change can be, especially when you're talking about looming and uncertain industry-wide change, I actually find this moment exciting because we've spent so much of the last decade in our craft really understanding that tension between human beings and the companies they work for. What better position could we be in than this one? What chance will all of you have to change this craft again? We're built for this. The writer and researcher Sarah Hendren once said something about the craft of engineering on Twitter, and she's since deleted her account, so you're going to have to trust me on this. It's given me the most hope in our purpose as engineers and engineering managers. It's guided me in my career, and it has gained particular salience for me in the last 3 years. She writes, "What's powerful about engineering is an understanding that the inherited built world isn't permanent. You can intervene. Structures and systems are malleable, situated. Mechanisms can be demystified, black boxes opened. You're here today to situate, to open the black boxes, to demystify the mechanisms, and to intervene for your organizations and your people. To live in that tension and in this liminal space, because for some reason or other you have chosen to do this for a living. I can't explain it any better than you can. This is a calling." How will you celebrate this passage? What can you do today? Let's say them together. Notice. Think. Persuade. Proceed. Great. Now settle in. It's going to be a great couple of days. Let's all be in the middle of it together. Thank you.